What is really shocking about today's program and its title, Youth Violence Kills Kids Dead, is that that title is not shocking to anyone who reads the newspapers and hears the news. All the more reason for City Club and the Oregon Psychological Association to sponsor this program. First, we will hear from a national authority whose impressive qualifications haven't interfered with what audience report as a down-home style. And chatting with Arnold here the last 15 minutes or so, he has a down-home style. Dr. Arnold Goldstein is professor of special education at Syracuse University. Just to give you a little flavor of his reputation and accomplishments in his field, he is the director of the New York State Task Force on Juvenile Gangs, as well as serving on several national and international commissions currently, and a number of them in the past, mostly on youth violence. If he is so inclined, his office walls would be overflowing with plaques and certificates commemorating his many contributions to a better understanding of juvenile aggression and its outcomes. Arnold, we are honored to have you here. Not yet, don't get up yet, but we're honored to have you here. Responding from a local standpoint to Dr. Goldstein's presentation will be a native Oregonian with 26 years in the social service field. Halim Rahsaan is a 17-year veteran of teaching and administrative duties at Portland Community College. He has been very active in our community in the field that will be discussed today, currently serving as program director for Youth Gangs Outreach Programs in Portland. Both these men bring us keen insights, professional backgrounds, and deep caring relative to the growing problems of youth violence. Dr. Goldstein, welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'm happy to be here in what I call Oregon. Us Easterners are allowed to say that. Aggression is a very hard behavior to change. Most acts of aggression work. I work a lot with juvenile delinquents around the country, which means, since I work in delinquency centers, state delinquency centers, which means I'm working with the incompetent criminals, the ones who get caught. There's a lot of youngsters out there doing just fine, in their view, being aggressive. Aggression is largely a learned behavior, and if you do something that works, you learn that you can keep doing it. So it is not an easy behavior to change, but there has been, in recent years, some progress in developing strategies for dealing with aggressive youth, and I want to share with you those strategies today. First, let's talk about what really ought to be considered unproductive strategies. Unproductive strategies. Very popular ways of dealing with aggressive kids that don't seem to be paying off. One of them, perhaps the most popular way for dealing with aggressive kids in our society, is heavy use of punishment. And especially in this political era, the heavier use of punishment is growing and growing. A most common way of trying to change aggressive behavior is with aggression. Papa, mama hits the kid. 90% of our children, 90% of you, got hit sometime during your growing up years. In my view, a child should never be hit, period, okay? That doesn't mean a child shouldn't be punished. I certainly do believe in nonviolent punishments, grounding and time out and losing privileges and so forth. But what does a child learn when a child is hit? First thing that the child learns, I mean, hitting has certain information value, is what he shouldn't do. So temporarily, he stops doing whatever the transgression was. That rewards the person who hit him. The parent, the teacher, whoever did the hitting, making it more likely that that hit her will hit again. The second thing that happens is that the child starts to learn the lesson, might makes right. He may not hit the parent, although these days, who knows, but he learns the lesson that a pretty efficient way of getting done what you want in life is to use hitting, and he passes it on. You've all heard that statistic that about 30% of the individuals who've been physically abused are abusive to their own children when they become parents. We did a study of 250 incarcerated delinquent youngsters around the country. I wanted to know what those youngsters thought causes aggression. I didn't ask you, the experts. I didn't ask mamas and papas. Let's go to the experts by experience, the delinquent kid themselves. Why does delinquency and aggression happen? We had them asked in interviews around the country, and what can be done about it. Interestingly, their theories, the kids' theories of why delinquency happens is the same as the experts. They use different language, but if you ask them how come, they talk about dysfunctional families, drugs, and peer pressure. But when you ask delinquent kids what to do about aggression to a person, they give very harsh answers. Longer incarceration, harsher incarceration. Sometimes their answers are poignantly funny. Incarceration with an attack dog. Life sentence without food. Okay? Funny but sad. What I'm saying here is that if I were to ask you what to do about aggression, you would give me an answer based on your experience, what you've read, what you've heard. That's what the kids are doing. People who are physically punished pass it on. Okay? It's not a great idea. Chronically aggressive kids can be taught alternative ways of dealing with provocation, and many of us are in the business of teaching kids just those behaviors. Okay? What else do we do in the form of punishment that I'm saying is unproductive? Well, we reprimand kids. We love to reprimand. There's 2 separate studies showing that at every grade level in the United States, starting with grade 2, the average American teacher issues 1 reprimand every 2 minutes. If you just sit in the back of a classroom, you won't hear many praises, but you'll hear many reprimands, okay? Reprimands are our favorite activity. I have a cartoon here that I'll describe to the radio audience. It's of a teacher standing in front of a classroom with a pointer in her hand, and she says to the class, "Good morning, class. My name is Miss Applegate. One false move and I'll kill you." Sometimes we love to reprimand so much we reprimand in advance. The kids haven't done anything. Okay? What's wrong with reprimands? Just like physical abuse of a child, it fails to teach the desirable alternative behavior. Here's another cartoon. A young man dressed in primitive outfit, writing on the blackboard, "I will not act primitive in class." Okay? And the question with this cartoon is, once he's through writing, "I will not act primitive in class," the required number of times, what has he learned? He's learned how to write that sentence, but he doesn't have the foggiest idea what to do instead, okay? Let us move away from violent punishments. The second strategy I'd like to describe as unproductive is the catharsis strategy. Do aggression to get rid of it. This is extremely popular, not just among lay people, but professional people. Tell that kid who's been hitting other kids, go to the gym and get rid of it, ventilate it, toot it out, like the toot the whistle, okay? Against the punching bag. Tell that husband who's been beating up on his wife to get it out of his system by hitting the couch instead. As a psychologist, I know if you talk to psychologists like myself, sometimes it's hard to get a factual answer. We love to say it depends. Whatever the question is, it depends. I'm going to give you a fact, and the fact is that this very popular catharsis idea that you get rid of aggression by expressing it like it's an energy that bubbles up is wrong. The research evidence is very clear that if that husband's beating up the couch and he looks at his watch and it's 10 after 6, he's used to having supper at 6 o'clock, he's not less likely to smack his wife because it's supper, he's more likely. And if that kid's hitting the punching bag and he gets in the zone and it feels good to hit that bag, and someone else comes and asks him for a turn, he's not less likely to smack the other kid, he's more likely. And that's because aggression is not an instinct and an energy that you get rid of. Aggression is something that people learn. They learn it, okay? The catharsis idea is not a productive strategy. And the final unproductive strategy I call cohabitation, learning to live with aggression. I don't know what the word cohabitation makes you think of. Maybe some young couple living together for 6 months to see if they want to get married. But cohabiting with aggression is not so sweet. And I give you, for example, the millions of elderly people who in the United States sentence themselves to solitary confinement every night because they're afraid to go out of the house. That's not living with something in any positive, constructive way. We can do better than that. So what are some productive ways of looking at aggression? Okay? The first is to look at aggression and changing it complexly. We have a habit in the United States of viewing our major problems far too simply. Too much poverty, let's have a war on it and get rid of it. I always thought that the war metaphor was interesting. Too much drugs, let's have another war, get rid of it. Too much cancer, let's look for the magic bullet and get rid of it. And these simple solutions to complex problems do not work. Aggression is the same thing. Every act of aggression has many causes, and therefore many potential solutions. Every act of aggression has causes that are physiological. It's no big surprise that males in our society, especially male adolescents, given the hormones that are flowing, are the most aggressive individuals, okay? Some of the causes of aggression are sociological. The culture, the traditions and mores of the culture in which one grows up. United States is a marvelous country. I wouldn't want to live anyplace else. But we are one of the most aggressive countries in the world, okay? Our traditions of individualism, competitiveness, assertiveness, pioneering spirit too often spill over into that intentional injury called aggression. What else helps contribute to the likelihood of an aggressive act? Who does the person hang around with? Two of the best predictors of juvenile delinquency are parental criminality and peer aggression. So who is the person spending his or her time with? What about the physical environment? Where does the person live? The temperature, noise, crowding, pollution, traffic. All of these things are part of the picture, meaning any of these that you can change in trying to reduce aggression will help. Then what about the perpetrator himself? Well, does he have alternative self-control skills? Does he have alternative pro-social values? I'm happy today to be in your state teaching staff who work with kids like this these very ways of instructing youngsters in being more pro-social. If he's lacking in those skills, sometimes he can be taught those skills. Now, you can have a male in an aggressive country like the U.S., hangs around with aggressive people, it's an unpleasant neighborhood, has few positive skills. You might not have an act of aggression. You might need something that sets it free, that disinhibits it. The major things that disinhibit aggression, that lower the threshold and set it free in our country, are alcohol, drugs, and successful models of aggression. Approximately 63% of delinquent youths were drug or alcohol involved at the time they committed their felony. Do something about drugs and alcohol, you've also lowered the aggression level. What about weapons? In order to be aggressive, you have to have some way of expressing the aggression. We now have 220 million privately owned guns in the United States. I think that's our greatest form of social pathology. I'm not going to give a lecture today on gun control, but you can certainly see the way my thinking goes. Okay? We are armed to the teeth, and increasingly these are concealed weapons. If it makes you feel more secure, good luck. It doesn't make me feel more secure. And the final thing you need for an act of aggression to take place is a victim. A victim. Every victim contributes to his or her victimization. It doesn't mean they cause it. It doesn't mean they're to blame. But whether it's a woman who gets mugged in a shopping center parking lot, or a man who gets shot at a bar in an altercation with another patron, you have to look at the transaction. Every act of aggression is between a perpetrator and a victim. Could the victim have done anything different to lower the likelihood that the aggression would have taken place? So the first thing I'm urging you to do is to think complexly. The second thing is to think prescriptively. I'm saying to you, there are many ways of intervening in the area of aggression. Different kids need different approaches. There's no single answer that's going to fit everybody. The third productive strategy I call situationality. All that means is you have to be not only concerned about the person, the perpetrator, or the potential perpetrator, but also the context. Where does the person hang out? What is it physically like? For example, I do a lot of work in the area of school violence. And of course, we have to do things to, for, and with those youngsters who are chronically aggressive. But what about the school itself, the physical qualities of the school and its management? There's more aggression in schools, the larger the school. Happily, there's a movement, a mini movement in the United States towards smaller schools. There's more aggression in certain physical locations in the school, the cafeteria, the stairwell, and the bathroom, than the classroom. The classroom is the safest place in the school. Most of the shootings that go on in the 4 minutes between classes in the hallway as these kids are passing one another and doing those terrible crimes of looking at one another, okay? March is the most aggressive month in the United States. Actually, the spring semester is more aggressive than the fall semester. 7th grade is the most aggressive grade. And the school's governance matters. Whether it's too lax or too strict, both of those involve more aggression than if it's something in the middle called firm but fair. And just as a sidelight, that's also true of good parenting. Good parenting is firm but fair. So not only look at the perpetrators, look at the context. What about prisons? I work in prisons a lot. Maybe some of you do. Do things to, for, and with the prisoners, but what about the prison itself? More aggression, the larger the prison, the more traffic, the older the prison, the less contact with the staff, and so forth. Are you concerned, as I am, about sports violence? I hope you are. Basketball and baseball are looking more and more like hockey and football every passing day. So let's talk about penalties and fines, but what about the sports themselves? There's more violence by members of home teams than visiting teams. There's more violence when the team is in the middle of its league standing, later in the game and later in the season. Isn't that interesting? People who believe in catharsis, that you get rid of it by doing it, would say the opposite. As the game and season went on, you should get rid of the aggression. In fact, the research shows just the opposite. Toward the end of the season, the end of the game, there's more aggression. And you could actually identify particular physical locations behind the net in hockey, near the 50-yard line in football. Teams that wear black uniforms are more aggressive. Temperature matters. There's more bean balls in baseball the hotter the temperature the day of the game. I don't know how these particular facts can be used, but it's a way of thinking about not just perpetrators, but environments also. Okay? Finally, I want to emphasize this crucial fact that aggression is primarily learned behavior. It's learned. It's not instinctive, it's learned. If it's learned, somebody is teaching it. Who is teaching our kids to be aggressive? Well, there are 3 main classrooms for aggression in the United States: the home, the school, and the mass media. In the American home, hitting a kid is legal in all 50 states. 90% of U.S. children are hit sometime during their growing up years. Or an object is thrown at them, or they're pushed or shoved. Hitting of children peaks between ages 3 and 4, but a quarter of our children are still being hit when they're adolescents. Sons are hit more than daughters. Older parents hit less than younger parents. Parents who themselves were hit when they were adolescents are more likely to hit their kids, and parents who hit each other are more likely to hit their kids. And as far as I'm concerned, since aggression is learned, I would boil all these facts down to one recommendation, and that is that we have mandatory training of all of our children in public schools on how to be a parent, because they ain't picking it up elsewhere. Okay? By the way, if you asked me how that would be carried out or when that would be carried out, I would say approximately 1 year before the age of possible pregnancy, which places that at 4th grade. The second place that our kids are learning to be aggressive is in America's schools. They learn from peers, that's obvious, but they also learn from teachers. Corporal punishment in American schools is legal in 23 states. Is it legal in this state? Well, good luck, and I'm pleased to hear that. 10 of the 23 states that permit corporal punishment are in America's southeast, which, by the way, just as an aside, tends to be the most violent part of the United States. More homicide, rape, assault, gun use, so on and so forth in the southeastern part of the United States. Approximately 750,000 instances of corporal punishment in America's schools. 30% of America's school children are minority children, but they get 40% of the corporal punishment. Not fair. An unfair approach is given out unfairly. Emotionally disturbed and learning disabled kids get a disproportionate amount of corporal punishment. Well, this probably makes, I think, the school personnel feel badly. How are they going to rationalize for themselves the fact that they're hitting children? And the way to do that is to make corporal punishment part of, quote, policy and procedure. We can develop all kinds of rules that make it appropriate policy about the number of strokes, the intensity of strokes, the size of the paddle, the presence of witnesses, prior parental approval. All of this will help make that act kosher. Here from the state of Tennessee, paddle specifications. The size of the paddle, the nature of the wood, varying with the age of the youngster, as if this changes anything. The reality is that if this woman sitting in front of me here in the audience is the teacher, and she gets hit by a flying book, and she happens to live in a state that permits corporal punishment, typically she will not be the one allowed to administer the corporal punishment. She has to take the child by the arm to the person in the school that I call the school's designated hitter. And usually it's the assistant principal who, following all those rules, in my view, temporarily stops the kid from doing what they wanted to stop doing, but again, gives the kid that lesson, might makes right. And all kinds of things are used to carry out that lesson. Hands, fists, straps, paddles, bats, hoses, forced exercise drills, forced eating of obnoxious substances, and unreasonable confinement. These are the ways in which corporal punishment is meted out in American schools today. The final classroom for aggression, and a very powerful one, the mass media. This overhead, this cartoon shows Bambo, my aggressive little deer, huh? I'm talking here about radio, I'm talking about comic books, video games, film, and especially television. Your children and mine spend 5 hours a day in one school, a building with erasers and teachers and textbooks, and then 5 hours a day in another school, and that's the box they sit in front of. The research on violence in television is now very clear. Hundreds and hundreds of studies cannot be denied. There are 3 very negative effects of this incredibly high diet of television violence, and it is a high diet. I'm sure you've heard all those numbers by now. 25 violent acts per hour on Saturday morning cartoons, 6 violent acts per hour on primetime evening television. A youngster by age 16 has seen 200,000 acts of violence, 33,000 of which are murders or attempted murders. I mean, what are we doing to our children? Talk to the television industry, they say not proven, like the tobacco industry, not proven. Even though they themselves spend billions of dollars in the proven belief that people will copy the 6 minutes of each half hour called the commercial, and then they deny that people will copy the 6 minutes called, the 24 minutes called the show. Well, in fact, it's been well demonstrated that in this first effect, called the copycat aggression effect, that people will copy, youngsters will copy, not a lot, but a substantial minority, and there's a lot more known about copycat violence. Male children copy more than female children. Young kids copy more than older kids. Preschool copy the most. Kids from low-income backgrounds copy more than middle-class backgrounds. The programs that engender copying, violently erotic shows, cause the most copying. Cartoons next, adventure next, and news next. There's more copying of the violence on the show when it is justified. What do I mean by justified? This gentleman and I are in a television fight, but I'm the good guy and he's the bad guy and I win. So there's more copying under that circumstance. When it's rewarded, it works. When it involves a weapon, when it's shown in detail, when it's shown frequently, and when it has that remarkable quality that only media violence can have, it's painless. Your name, sir, is what? Rich and I are 2 actors. We're pretending we have a fight. And you know how those stage fights go. He throws me through a window. I get up, I hit him with a chair. We roll on the ground. We punch, we kick, and then we stand up. His tie is straight. The ash is still on my cigarette. No cuts, no scrapes, no bruises. We smile and we walk away or something like that. No wonder a 3-year-old at an accident scene can say to her father when pointing to a dead body, "I know it's deaded, Daddy, but why doesn't it get up?" Okay? Kids don't have a sense of the painfulness of aggression, nor a sense of the permanence of death. The second effect, the second very negative effect on television violence is a victim effect, more fearful, more mistrusting, more self-protective. And I think the main effect of the three, the one that I'm most concerned about because it affects everybody, is called the bystander effect. And its main feature is desensitization. It changes who we are. It changes how we see the world. We see the world as a more threatening place. And we also see the world as a place where aggression is sort of the way things are, and it bothers us less and less. That's the key. First month of the Vietnam War, Walter Cronkite on CBS is giving the body count. Wife says to husband, "Come on in for supper, honey." Husband says, "Yeah, I don't think I want any supper today. I'm kind of upset from what's on the news." Last month of the Vietnam War, husband says to the wife, "Hey, honey, Walter's up to the body count. Is supper ready yet?" You see what I'm saying? We adapt, we adjust. What's on television now? Chainsaw dismemberment, spurting arteries, and violently pornographic rape scenes. "Rich, you want to watch a little TV tonight?" Rich says, "No, thanks. It's just another one of those spurting artery movies." They're boring to us, and the television industry then has to keep escalating the violence. Half tongue-in-cheek, I say to you folks, there's only 2 levels of TV violence left. And I see you finish your lunch, so I can tell you what these are. One of them is what I call hemovision. Blood will spurt out of the set onto your rug. And the last level of TV violence, the last level possible, is the snuff film, where actors will actually be killed. And I used to talk about that as highly hypothetical until about 3 months ago, I read about a video that was being imported from England, 18 actual executions. This is what we're watching. What are the recommendations? I have some recommendations, mostly to parents. I'd like to make recommendations to the Congress also, because the Congress is stuck without abridging First Amendment rights. The V chip is not going to do it. When movies started to be rated R and X, that drew people to it, didn't keep them away. When V comes out as high violence, people will want to see it, not be put off by it. I think what we need is stronger action, and if Congress can't do it, we need it as citizens. And I'm not above recommending consumer boycotts to those advertisers who, in fact, advertise the highest violence television. But in the meantime, for parents, we suggest watch a few children's shows yourself to get a little better sense of what Junior is watching. Plan viewing in advance, emphasizing nonviolent shows. There aren't many, but there are some. And then see what the child is actually viewing. Are they actually watching what, in fact, you planned they would watch? And watch with them, trying to explain to them the undesirability of initiating violence, helping them understand the difference between real and pretend. It's a tricky business watching television with your kids. I need to tell you that only 10%, get this statistic, only 10% of what children watch is children's shows. 90% of what children watch is adult programming. So these recommendations about children's shows are a beginning, but you have to be much more concerned about them sitting down with you as you watch your violent shows. Provide interesting alternative activities, especially reading. I've spent my professional career teaching people certain aggression management skills, but if a youth care worker came to me and said, "I have 1 hour a week to spend with a kid, what should I do with it?" I'd say, forget all the stuff that I've done, teach him how to read. Nothing is more important than that. Explain false or exaggerated commercial claims to your youngster, and then as a citizen encourage the kind of legislation that in fact can perhaps make a difference. I think I need to say to you in conclusion, for somebody who's been in the aggression management business for 30-odd years, I'm not optimistic, but I'm not pessimistic. I'm realistic. We live in a very violent society where aggression is taught, encouraged, and supported. There are things we can do about it if we don't, in a sense, give up the ghost and we continue our concern as both citizens and professionals to try to change this very damaging behavior. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I really appreciate Dr. Goldstein's comments. I read his chapter in his book, Juvenile Gangs, And I was really prepared to come here to have a real out-and-out debate with him, because I was going to say that I really disagree with 90% of what you had to say in that particular article, but the research was extremely good. It was right on time. The presentation that he's made today certainly makes a lot of sense if we take it for granted. I was extremely impressed, too, by the 1992 report that was completed by the City Club. I assume it was the Educational Committee, and I just wondered, without them actually acknowledging this, anyone in the audience can tell me what is the most violent gang in Oregon? Anyone know? What'd you say, sir? Take a guess. I think I heard the right. Oh, no. No. Trailblazers. Well, they're probably getting to the point that they're going to rank up there. According to the statistics and the information that was done by the City Club, and I'd like to really get a copy of that, the 1992 stats said that the most dangerous gangs in Portland and Oregon were the skinheads. And, sometimes we don't like to think about that, because I think a lot of the crimes and things that they're involved in get put into the category of hate crimes. But they're the most dangerous gang in Oregon. And so you say to yourself, well, how can that be? Because we consistently hear about the Crips and the Bloods and the Red Cobras, and particularly with the Crips and Bloods involved in drive-by shootings and a lot of other activities. Sure, you hear about that, but I guess having worked at the juvenile court, I work at the juvenile court on the weekends, and there are a lot of activities that the skinheads are involved in that never really get reported in the media. You can see the violence between them attacking someone who, because of their religious beliefs. You could see them attacking someone that may be an interracial couple. You may see them attacking someone just because of the views that they have that are different. So there are a multitude of reasons why they may get involved in what Dr. Goldstein talks about in terms of this violent behavior. We do have a gang problem here. Last count in Portland, there are 42 different sets of Crips here in Portland. We haven't really got an actual number on how many Bloods are actually here, but traditionally throughout the United States nationally, they outrank the Bloods by 4-to-1 ratio. The other thing that's real apparent too, and it's listening to Dr. Goldstein's presentation, is that the young ladies or the women are playing a much more active and aggressive role in the activities of the gangs, where traditionally they would be involved in holding the weapons. If they were stopped by the police, they would give the weapons to the girls. 9 times out of 10, if it was a male police officer, he certainly was not going to search the young lady. They would move on down the road, and the girls would give the weapons back. The girls are not just holding the weapons now, they're carrying the weapons. Many times they're involved in drive-by shootings as well as driving the vehicle. I saw earlier this year a Hispanic gang in Texas, some part of Texas, where in order for the girls to become a part of the gang activities, it was necessary that they had to have sex with the gang members who were HIV positive. And so certainly at the end of that type of activity, they were certainly interested in going to the hospital to see whether or not they had contracted the HIV virus, which you really can't tell from that kind of encounter for at least a year. But the other thing that's real interesting as I listen to Dr. Goldstein is that the girls have a tendency to be more violent on a one-to-one up-close basis. The young men are involved in shootings. The young ladies are certainly involved in a lot of hand-to-hand combat. You see a lot of knives. You see a lot of razors involved. It's almost like the personal attack that they're involved in, where the young men will be involved in a drive-by shooting, and whether they hit their particular victim or not is questionable. Certainly, they have caused all of us a number of ways of networking with each other. And I can't really say what's happening in other parts of the country, but I think that we have really developed a very good relationships with the police and other community organizations. There's still a lot of denial, and I was part of a task force. There's still a lot of denial in terms of what is going on in Seattle. There have been shootings on the school grounds in Seattle, and yet there is still the denial that there are gangs actually involved. Of course, and I think probably what is traditional behavior is a denial that this has actually come to your town, because from 1985 to 1988, there was a denial period here. I can remember in 1985 of giving a report to the school board that the young men from California were coming into this city. They weren't actually doing anything at that point. They were just basically recruiting. They were talking to school kids. And that I felt that this was a situation that we really needed to get in front of before it actually became a little bit more continuous. When I finished, the top administrator at that time rose and told the school board that categorically there were no problems with gangs. There would never be a problem with gangs here in Portland, that they had the mechanisms to deal with it, and that this is something that would never really get out of hand. And certainly today, I stand before you as one of many service providers in the Portland area that particularly deal with gang kids. I certainly agree with a lot of the reasons for aggressions in terms of why young men seem to be the perpetrators. It was always kind of interesting to me. For a number of years I was involved in boxing, and it was always interesting how our coaches and trainers would condition us to look across the ring and you had to tell yourself, this is the reason that I had to do without certain things in life for the last 6 weeks or 6 months. This is the reason that I really need to go out here and kill this guy. This is the reason for having the kind of attitude that when the bell rings, I need to go out and just really take this guy out. And so you go through that as an amateur for 3 rounds. At the end of the 3rd round, you go over, you're expected by your coach and trainers to go over and put your arms around the guy and tell him, nice fight. And so for at least a 9-minute period, you're supposed to display all this aggression, and then at the end of 9 minutes, you cut it off, and all of a sudden he's your best friend. You can get together with him after you leave the ring and socialize. But it's really hard for some people to make that connection in terms of cutting off. And we see that time and time again. I think I was talking to Monica. I think the influence that the media has had on our children has been very devastating. You used to see things like, particularly when Muhammad Ali was in his heyday, of really carrying on a kind of a commercial atmosphere at the pre-fight, the weigh-ins. And now at the pre-fight and the weigh-ins, you actually see the 2 combatants fighting. This happened a number of times with Riddick Bowe, where he actually hit another guy at a press conference. He hit his opponent. And kids see this on TV, and they think, certainly, this must be okay. You see boxers knock a guy down, and while he's on the canvas, they hit him. This comes to be kind of acceptable behavior. I think here in the area of Portland, I think one of the chapters that I was also impressed with Dr. Goldstein's book was developing cultural sensitivity competence in people that work with our kids. We have a lot of individuals that work with these kids that really are not culturally competent. And it certainly doesn't mean, from my perspective, that you have to be from that group to be culturally competent, because there are folks that work with these kids that are not culturally competent. So what does that mean? First competency consists of understanding of one's own culture, values, and biases. A second one is the competency awareness of how your cultural values and biases affect the people that you're actually working with. The third competency that you need to be aware of involves comfort with cultural differences between one's own values and norms and those of cultural differences of the individuals that you're working with. Fourth and final one is a competency and sensitivity and understanding in the situations in which, with a cultural different person, it's not advisable for reasons such as that you don't put your own personal biases and preferences into the situation. It's very hard, I think, in many instances, for these kids to have a lot of choices about what they're going to do in terms of gangs. I think one of the things that we have to realize is that there are not a lot of programs. There are not a lot of resources available for these kids to plug into. Certainly here in Portland, one of the things that was really attractive for a lot of these kids joining gangs, a high percentage of these kids were special ed kids. So a high percentage of these kids were kids that were labeled, that were put off to the side, where other kids made fun of them, but getting on and off the bus, and they certainly didn't feel special. We know that certainly one of the motivating factors of joining a gang is recognition. So now I have an opportunity to be recognized for some of the things that Dr. Goldstein talked about in terms of aggressive behavior, the kind of jewelry that I can actually wear, a particular status of clothes. And so that becomes very impelling to kids who really have never had any kind of understanding of what it means to be recognized. I certainly don't think it's predominantly prevalent with African Americans, because we have Hispanic gangs here. We have the 18th Streeters, the 12th Streeters. We have a multitude of Asian gangs that include the Red Cobras, kids from Laos, and you don't hear a lot about the Asian gangs. And one of the reasons that you don't hear a lot about the Asian gangs is that their major source of revenue is extortion. And it really works well. You know, we've had cases where a restaurant owner has opened a restaurant, and the gang members, the Red Cobras, will go in and basically tell them that, understand, you have just opened your restaurant. It looks like you're going to do a lot of business. We will only take $1,000 a week. The restaurant owner says, I'm not going to pay you $1,000 a week. They said, okay, fine. So they leave. Maybe the family still has members in Vietnam. They get a telegram a week later that the grandmother and grandfather have been killed. The gangsters return. I understand you had a death in your family, your grandmother and grandfather. Now it's $1,500 a week. And so it's real clear that the correlation between the death in the other country where the relatives are and what has happened here, that there's a link. And there is a link. We're talking about organized crime, folks. I mean, what you see here is just a small part of the Army, but it's a problem that we have to look at. It's something that we have to address, and I think that we certainly address that with additional resources for our kids in this community. And I guess at this time, Monica's going to take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you both for your comments today and for being here. We in this community have decided that youth over 15, if they commit serious violent crimes, will be incarcerated. What do you think about what factors should we consider in looking at balancing incarceration versus treatment of youth who are extremely violent?
Well, I have a clearly liberal view on this, and you can agree and disagree. We are treating our delinquent youth as adults. I certainly do think if you do the crime, you should do the time. Don't get me wrong. Negative behaviors have to have consequences, but we are getting much too severe. If your goal in dealing with such kids is retribution, then you can lock them up as long as you want. But if your goal reflects the fact that they're coming out again, and they're still our kids, even though they've done bad things, and you have any interest in rehabilitation, to lock up youngsters, especially youngsters who've committed mid-level felonies, as if they were adults, is not only going to be something that you're going to be unhappy about in an emotional sense, in a psychological sense, but you're going to pay a lot of money for that decision. I think it's a very bad decision.
I guess the thing I would add to that would be the fact that no matter how long you lock them up, if they get out, they are going to come back to a community. And they're going to probably come back more versed than they were when they went in. There's a lot of behaviors that they get a chance to learn while incarcerated from other gangsters who can certainly pass on their particular pet peeves and their recipes for continuing the process. We need more programs. We certainly need more avenues for these kids to be involved in. But the attitude of just locking them up and throwing away the key is certainly not going to work, because at some point they are going to return to our community.
Yes, Buzz Marin, City Club member. Wanted to ask you, what would you say to children today who have a sense of hopelessness about all the violence they see around them?
Well, I think that's something that many kids have a problem with. I guess a lot of it for me starts with the family and being able to get tied into a family structure, no matter whether it's a single-parent family or not. I think as you look at the whole coalition of the kids and stuff that are involved in this particular pattern of aggression, so much of this starts with the family not being unified. There are not a lot of activities, not a lot of resources, not a lot of recreational things that kids can get tied into compared to when I was coming along. There were gangs when I came along, but there was more of a choice in terms of whether or not you actually wanted to be involved in that activity. And also, I think the core of that was the family was involved, and that's where we got our values from in terms of whether or not you should actually be involved in that. The other part of that was the extended family, which was a community. I think anyone within a 6-block radius could punish me based upon any inappropriate behavior I was demonstrating during that time. You don't have that now. You have people who live beside each other for 20 years and basically barely know each other's names. So there's been a whole breakdown of the whole community structure that allows a lot of things to happen. Doctor?
I think that's an excellent answer, and I agree with that. I wouldn't say anything to the kids. I would talk to our local political structure. I don't think there's any great mystery about what needs to be done for kids who are hopeless. We're going exactly the wrong direction when we call recreational, vocational, social, and job-oriented programming pork and get rid of it. If that kind of programming exists in our country, to that extent, kids can be hopeful and not hopeless.
Bob Bernstein, North Portland Youth and Family Center. I'm concerned about the service delivery system that we use. It seems that human development goes from most restrictive to least restrictive. When we look at how we deal with these kids, we do the exact opposite, and we allow them to bomb out of program after program, and oftentimes stay one step ahead of their consequences. I'm also concerned that we set up separate pots of money, so the kids have to interrupt their caregiving, because we've taken a sort of bean counter approach to funding of programs. I'd like to hear comments regarding that.
Well, I think that's a very excellent rhetoric question. I think the answer is we shouldn't do those things, okay? Indeed, these kids get cut up into little pieces, and there does need to be a coordination of services. And I would hope that the fact that we're in an era today where America really doesn't love its children will change to some extent, and we'll get to be less mean-spirited, and for their sake and our own sakes, look to the future and be more concerned with directing whatever funding does exist in the direction of these very needy children.
We have time for one last question.
I'm Julie Sterling. I'm concerned about the epidemic of gun violence and would like to know what your suggestions are for controlling the proliferation, particularly of handguns in this country.
I guess I would answer that by saying it's not the guns that kill, it's the people that kill. And I think the fact that we do have, certain rights under the Constitution certainly means that I think people that have guns certainly have a responsibility to their children to keep them out of harm's way, to make sure that maybe they're not loaded and there's a bullet in the chamber. Certainly the other avenue is to provide some kind of gun safety to your children. But I think talking about controlling guns, I don't think that that's the answer. I think one of the things that we look at, the police were forced to go to a whole new pattern of weaponry because of the kind of guns that the kids have. The kids had Glock guns that would shoot a clip of 15 or 17. The police could only shoot 5 or 6 times before they had to reload. So they actually forced them to go to a different kind of weaponry. They were not getting the guns from the stores. You know, we're talking about a lot of illegal weapons that come into this country, and they still come into this country, and they have all kind of avenues of purchasing them. They're certainly not signing up through the appropriate manners to get these in terms of a 15-day waiting period. I think there has to be some other kind of avenue in terms of how we're going to deal with this whole issue of gun control.
We've just had a lot of light cast on a very dark and discouraging phenomena in our country. And I want to thank both these gentlemen for bringing their professionalism, their experience, and their articulation to this group today. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned, and I hope to see you all on the 8th of December.